Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. Tonight, China is warning that President Trump's vow to impose high tariffs on steel and aluminum would have a huge impact, they say, on global trading order. And Beijing says it will work together with the many other nations publicly outraged by his doubling down on protecting American workers against, in his view, unfair foreign competition. So tonight, there's an unlikely coalition forming against the president on trade, from Chinese communists to free trade Republicans and Democrats, as well as global business interests. Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry is following the story. Joins us now. Good evening, Ed.
Good to see you. That's a lot to sort out, Shannon, and this has rattled so many leaders around the world. The various officials are threatening to retaliate with tariffs aimed at everything from American blue jeans to motorcycles. But true to form, the president does not seem to care. He made this vow in the campaign, and he prides himself in actually following up on what he promised.
Liberty Mutual stood with me when this...
In fact, after a lot of hand-wringing about this damaging the markets, Wall Street seemed to calm down today. And the president made very clear he's not backing down, tweeting that, quote, trade wars are good and easy to win. The president insisting, quote, we must protect our country and our workers. Our steel industry is in bad shape. If we don't have steel, you don't have a country. Well, Republican Senator Ben Sasse fired back, quote, trade wars are never won. Trade wars are lost by both sides. Kooky 18th century protectionism will jack up prices on American families and will prompt retaliation from other countries. Make no mistake, if the president goes through with this, it will kill American jobs. That's what every trade war ultimately does. So much losing, the senator says. But the president got a big thumbs up from another Republican, Rick Saccone, who's running a special election March 13th for a House seat in the key battleground of Pennsylvania. And today said when other countries are not playing by the rules, the president is right by standing strong.
Well, I'm all for protecting Western Pennsylvania jobs, and the steel industry is very big here. You know, some of our competitors haven't, they've tilted the field a little bit. So I think President Trump is just trying to level it back out.
If you want to look
this
better,
is a president who's been talking about this, not just since the campaign, but frankly for decades. And this is something that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. The president is committed to looking out, protecting the American worker. That's exactly what he's going to do.
But the number 2 Republican in the Senate, John Cornyn, is not buying that, saying today GOP leaders are actually going to hold hearings as a check on the Republican president, which is pretty awkward. Cornyn is concerned about unintended consequences. Some countries bristling at tariffs on aluminum and steel, so they'll retaliate against the American agriculture sector, for example. Then there's this. The Beer Institute is claiming it will cost them millions of dollars because of that tariff on aluminum impacting the price of a beer can, which will get passed on to the consumer. And when you take on beer drinkers, Shannon, that's when you've gone too far.
Especially in America. You do not want to mess around with that.
You don't want to do that, especially in a midterm election year.
And not on Friday night. Yeah. All right, Ed, great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. All right, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee making serious allegations tonight. The FBI, he says, may have ignored its own rules and may have broken the law. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is here with the latest. Catherine.
Shannon, in this letter to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes says the surveillance warrant for Trump campaign aide Carter Page appears to be a clear violation of FBI rules for submitting evidence to the FISA court and may also violate criminal statutes. Citing the FBI's strict set of internal rules and procedures known as the DIOG, that stands for Domestic Investigations and Operations Guide, it was instituted by then FBI Director Robert Mueller, who is now the Russia Special Counsel. The congressional letter reads in part, quote, the accuracy of information contained within FISA applications is of utmost importance. Only documented and verified information may be used to support FBI applications to the FISA court. The letter questions how the unverified Trump dossier compiled by former British spy Christopher Steele meets that standard for the original application in October 2016 and at least 3 subsequent renewals. The Justice Department has until March 8th to explain whether the rules have changed. The House panel's Republican chairman went further and told the Attorney General that the use of false or unverified information to secure a surveillance warrant could also be a violation of multiple criminal statutes, including conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and contempt of court. The committee's ranking Democrat said there was no surveillance abuse during the 2016 election and that the FBI and Justice Department had acted in good faith. Shannon?
All right, Catherine Herridge, thank you very much. Our next guest serves on the House Intelligence Committee, so we're going to ask him about this latest shot at the FBI, but also Republican Congressman Chris Stewart says that former White House Communications Director Hope Hicks didn't get a fair shake when she testified this week. Congressman, great to have you with us live tonight.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Okay, so let's start, first of all, with this letter that Congressman Nunes, the chair, has sent saying, I want this to be explained to me. Did the FBI break its own internal rules? Did it break criminal statutes? What do you make of the letter, which is getting plenty of pushback from the left?
Yeah, well, it's appropriate. Look, if you don't have verified, documented information before the FISA courts, then you have no due process. You've essentially lost the rule of law. For heaven's sakes, if you're a FISA court judge, do you want to be wondering whether the evidence presented before you is actually accurate? Do you want to wonder if it's just, in some cases, political garbage, like this dossier is? Or do you want them to presume that the FBI has vetted this information, that they've documented it, that they've verified it, that they know it's accurate? Of course, that's what these FISA court judges expect. And that just didn't happen in this case. And you can't just shrug that off and say, well, you know, we'll do better next time, or this is an exception. We have to know that that's not taking place.
Well, you know, the Democrats say that all of these allegations are baseless, that none of that did happen. In fact, in a response to Chairman Nunes' letter, we have the ranking Democrat, Adam Schiff, says this. Chairman Nunes continues his effort to attack and malign the honorable men and women of the FBI and Department of Justice. The Republican memo having been discredited, this new attempt to roil the department is little more than another transparent effort to defend President Trump by trying to discredit and distract from the special counsel and congressional investigations. All right, a lot to unpack there, but I want to start with this first part, that he's setting up Chairman Nunes against the men and women of the FBI, which is clearly not the way that Republicans have phrased this so far. Is that a false, almost a straw man, saying that if you're going to criticize the issue here, then you're going after the men and women of the Bureau?
Well, of course it is. I mean, there's so much of what he said that's just nonsense. But since you chose that, let's start with this. I mean, is any agency or organization within the federal government above any oversight or above any reproach? Of course not. I was a member of the United States military. We had enormous power, but with that power came enormous responsibility. And we would ask the same thing of the FBI and the Department of Justice. And by the way, I have been contacted by more than a few FBI agents who have said to me, thank you for doing this. They recognize we're not attacking every member of this agency. We're not attacking every FBI agent. We're trying to hold a few people who were their leadership accountable. They want us to do that. How in the world can you say that this, by asking for accountability by their leadership, is a broad sweeping attack on the entire agency? It's absolutely nonsense.
All right, I want to make sure I get to a couple of other things. One is also this week, Congressman Schiff saying there is ample evidence of collusion. You also sit on the committee. What have you seen with regard to evidence of collusion?
Well, I've seen quite a lot of evidence of collusion between Hillary Clinton and the Russian. But look, I would say to my friend, Mr. Schiff, we've been looking at this for going on 15 months. If you have evidence of collusion, will you please share it with us? Because none of the rest of us have seen it. Neither has the American people. If you have evidence of collusion, please tell us what it is. But he's done this again and again, where he's come out and he makes these accusations and then says, well, wait, I can't share it with you. I mean, it's classified. And he's got to remember, you're making serious accusations against, in this case, innocent people. You're accusing them of treason, essentially. And it's had real impacts on their lives. And if you continue to make that accusation, even Dianne Feinstein has said there isn't evidence. If Mr. Schiff says he has evidence, then share it with us. And if you don't have the evidence, then don't continue to make the accusations.
Okay, Hope Hicks this week testified behind closed doors. It came out afterwards that she admitted to telling white lies occasionally for the president. But you said that you think she was being walked into a trap during the questioning. What can you tell us?
Oh, there's no question that that's true. I mean, we could see this happening as soon as the questioning began along these lines. And by the way, she was there for nearly 9 hours. She was trying to answer these questions. But they asked her very, very broadly, have you in any way, fashion, or form against any matter or any subject ever told anything that would be deceitful or deceptive? Well, no one can answer that question perfectly. Of course, we've all had instances like that. When someone asks you if they look good in this new suit, sometimes they don't, and you may not be honest with them. And so we quickly jumped in and said, Ms. Hicks, we want to know regarding this investigation, regarding any accusations of collusion or conspiracy or treason or the hacking of the DNC, regarding any of those things, have you ever been told to not be truthful or to be dishonest? And she said adamantly, very clearly, no, I have not. But in some of my other interactions, for example, the example she used, maybe Mr. Trump has been busy and someone wanted to see him, and I was instructed to tell him he wasn't available, he wasn't there. That's the normal course of, just human interaction. Sometimes we're not perfectly honest, and yet, as soon as she said that, someone on the committee goes out and talks to the press and says, yep, she was talking and she was told to be deceitful by the president. It just simply wasn't an honest portrayal of that conversation at all.
Well, we all, and Americans in general, I think, are ready for this to wrap and have some answers, as former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said to Congressman Schiff yesterday. But we know there are still many things to do before this is resolved. So, Congressman, thank you for stopping in with us tonight. We await the findings of the committee.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, one high-ranking diplomat says the killings of civilians in a Damascus, Syria suburb may constitute crimes against humanity. President Trump is talking with U.S. allies about what can be done. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Amy Kellogg is following the story from London tonight.
The UN Human Rights Chief says this amounts to war crimes. The Syrian government's bombardment of eastern Ghouta, just outside the capital of Damascus, has led to 600 deaths in the past 2 weeks, many of them children.
There are no longer words adequate to describe the brutality of the regime's attacks on its own population. The horror of this situation has surpassed even the ability of the English language to describe it.
A shaky ceasefire in Ghouta isn't holding, complicating efforts to evacuate people, particularly those needing urgent medical care. Each side blames the other for violating the truce. And as we know, this civil war is not just Syrian on Syrian, but it is turning into a global proxy war. Iran, Russia, the U.S., Turkey. Turkey, increasingly concerned about Kurdish strength in the region, is hitting Kurdish fighters in Syria, some of whom are backed by the U.S. Turkish airstrikes and fighting led yesterday to a number of deaths of both Turkish and Kurdish fighters in Afrin. Meanwhile, more alleged war crimes with a recent suspected chemical weapons attack in Ghouta. The Syrians insist the rebels holed up there are to blame for the apparent use of chlorine and that they surrendered such weapons long ago. The U.S. isn't buying that.
Syria has no credibility on this issue, none whatsoever. But I will say this, Syria says it's fulfilled all of its obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention. That is just simply absurd.
And a UN report this week says North Korea has been illicitly shipping materials to Syria that could be used to make chemical weapons, something Pyongyang denies.
President Trump and German Chancellor Angela Merkel spoke by phone last night about the deteriorating situation in Syria. They spoke of the urgency for the ceasefire to be respected, and they expressed their concerns about Russian President Vladimir Putin's latest remarks about arms developments and their negative impact upon international arms control efforts. Shannon.
Amy Kellogg, thank you very much. President Trump extending the designation of a national emergency over human rights abuses in Venezuela. President Obama issued the original executive order in 2015. President Trump added to it last year. He says the situation continues to pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the U.S. Well, it was either the best of days or 4 straight really bad days, depending on which market you're talking about. The Dow falling for the 4th straight day, the last 2 over tariffs and trade worries. But initial jobless claims coming in at the lowest level in 49 years, since December 6th, 1969. A sign economists say that the job market is actually growing. The East Coast getting socked by a powerful nor'easter, bringing high winds, rain, flooding, and snow, depending on where you are. Thousands of flights and train routes have been canceled, power outages and downed trees all across the region. Here in the nation's capital, didn't snow, but federal workers did get a wind day. They were told to stay home because government offices were closed amid 60 to 70 mile-an-hour wind gusts. Hundreds of thousands here in the Washington area are without power. When President Obama said his administration was scandal-free, a lot of folks took it as a knock on the current administration. But is it even true? Our panel investigates and debates next. And a student either threatened violence or made a joke in poor taste. But either way, a judge took it seriously and came up with a novel solution. Trace Gallagher explains that next. And you may have heard about the lawsuit against Pennsylvania over thousands of non-citizens registered to vote. So we are looking into the evidence
that I've ever seen. Now, some of you may have loved it. If you do, you are one of the stupidest, dumbass people I've ever met.
I'm guessing that was unscripted. That was Utah Senator Orrin Hatch candidly discussing his feelings about Obamacare in a speech at the American Enterprise Institute. But the retiring senator backtracking a bit today, saying this on Twitter, quote, "Yesterday, I made a poorly worded joke about Obamacare supporters, a joke that was not reflective of my actual feelings towards my friends on the other side of the aisle. While I occasionally slip up, I believe my legislative record reflects my commitment to bipartisanship and civility much more than my flippant, off-the-cuff comment." What does our political panel think? Vince Colonnese, the Daily Caller editorial director, and Sarah Westwood, the White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Vince, what do you make of it? And then the not retracting the whole thing, but a little of backtracking.
Yeah, it's amazing to watch. In the age of Trump, even there's some things that are too far. You can't say things like that. But I don't disagree that Obamacare is stupid. I mean, in terms of just what makes America great, I think, is the fact that we are a people who have liberty. And we've basically chosen this government because we kind of all agree on the details, but we want that liberty. And Obamacare sort of seized us of that, because what it did was it forced Americans to buy a product that we've never been forced to buy before, and to get a lower quality one, actually, than the one that we were purchasing prior to that. So, yeah, it was an invasion of privacy for the United States and for the average American's liberty. And for that reason, it was stupid. So, in that way, I agree.
And, Sarah, this is like pretty salty language from him because, you know, he is pretty reserved. He's a gentleman. He's Mormon. I mean, he talks a lot about being having a very disciplined life. I think the worst thing I've ever heard from him before was crap. And even that was kind of, whoa. I mean, Orrin Hatch just said the word crap. This was for him, though, pretty salty.
Exactly. From retiring, old, wizened Orrin Hatch, I think maybe he should have learned a little bit from Hillary Clinton, who learned the hard way in 2016 that going after the supporters of a policy or a politician is never a good idea. You should always attack the policy or the politician. People who support things obviously don't deserve those personal attacks. So I think that Orrin Hatch probably is learning that lesson now, that maybe he should have attacked the merits of Obamacare like Vince, and not necessarily the people
who liked it,
who supported it. Right.
Okay, topic 2 now. President Obama talking about what happened and what didn't happen under his administration. Here's a bit of what he said under something that happened the other night that was supposed to be completely under lock and key, but some audio got out.
One of the things I'm proud of in my administration was the fact that, and I think these things are connected, we didn't have a scandal that, embarrassed us.
Now, Vince, when this came out, I have gotten several tweets, articles, people sending me gigantic lists of things they do consider scandals, and then they ask whether they just simply weren't embarrassing to the administration.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of mythology around President Obama. It's due in part to the press being sort of obsequious and credulous about him, that he's no drama Obama. It kind of felt like, if you remember, it was constant drama Obama. Everything from the moment he got into politics, it was Jeremiah Wright, it was Fast and Furious, it was the IRS targeting scandal, it was his mom jeans. It was literally everything that he did.
You're counting mom jeans as a scandal.
Mom jeans is a scandal. I think
scandal.
It's an underappreciated scandal in the Obama administration, but it is a scandal. And by the way, it kind of conditioned us to have scandals and deal with them in presidencies. And that's why I think in the Trump presidency, like, so many people get upset about everything. They're like, how come you don't think this is a scandal? Look, Obama, I think he ran roughshod at time over the powers of the executive, where we've gotten to the point where he actually was like creating laws related to immigration. Yet, President Trump gives some advice to his son over a press release, and that's a constitutional crisis now. So there's a range of things here.
There's one more topic I want to get to, so I'll give you this, Sarah. This is about conversations. The president wants to be really tough on drug dealers. Axios reporting this, saying, according to 5 sources who've spoken with Trump about the subject, he often leaps into a passionate speech about how drug dealers are as bad as serial killers and should all get the death penalty. Now, people have completely freaked out about this, but a lot of average Americans out there say, maybe I would think it, maybe I wouldn't say it, but they don't seem opposed to somebody who, sells fentanyl to dozens of people and they all die.
Right. I think because of the parallels with Rodrigo Duterte of Philippines, people have sort of been a little bit worried about this because,
just going out into the streets and shooting drug dealers and killing them. I don't think that's what he's proposing.
But drugs have underpinned President Trump's policies on illegal immigration, on building the wall, on increasing, support for police. These are all, cracking down on drugs, cracking down on crime, that sort of thing has sort of underpinned a lot of other policy proposals that President Trump has put forward. So it's not surprising to hear him use that kind of language on drugs, even though maybe, he could choose it more carefully to avoid stirring up this kind of drama.
Yeah. Not everyone seems especially offended. but some people definitely do. Most of them inside the Beltway.
A lot of people die from it. 7 times as many as died in Parkland in a single day from the opioid crisis.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real problem. And they've announced some new initiatives, so we'll see if they have teeth and if they work. Great to see you both on Friday night.
Thank you.
You too.
Stick around for the dance party if you want to. Okay, some say violent video games have nothing to do with actual acts of violence. And then there's a judge who just made a stunning ruling, and that comes just ahead of a White House conference with video game creators. Trace has that report next. And America's pastor is laid to rest. The Reverend Billy Graham's uplifting send-off.
Turn up your
social and mental health reform. Now the issue of violent video games as a potential root cause of gun violence is on the president's agenda. Tonight, the case of a judge ordering an Illinois teen to stay away from video games is sparking controversy. Trace Gallagher has the report. Trace.
Shannon, the 16-year-old boy from just outside Chicago was apparently annoyed last week when his school was temporarily shut down after someone made a threat. The boy then posted a clip on Snapchat saying, quote, "Y'all need to shut up about school shootings or I'll do one." The 16-year-old's attorney said the post was a joke in poor taste. The judge failed to see the humor and ordered the teen confined to his home for 2 weeks with no phone, no social media, and no violent video games. The judge also chastised the boy's parents for not monitoring his social media and for allowing him to play those games in the first place. The judge's decision barring the student from violent games comes amid a growing debate on whether the games actually contribute to bad behavior. According to Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin, the answer is yes. Governor Bevin says he's all for free speech, but, quote, "There is zero redemptive value. There is zero upside to any of this being in the public domain, let alone in the minds and hands and homes of our young people." The governor sees the spree of mass shootings as a cultural problem, not a firearm problem. And during a meeting this week with lawmakers, President Trump echoed the call for a closer look at violent videos. Watch.
You have to also look at videos. They're vicious. You look at some of these videos. I mean, I don't know what this does to a young kid's mind. Somebody growing up and forming and looking at videos where people are just being blown away left and right.
And now White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says the president plans to meet next week with leaders in the video game industry. But apparently nobody told the game companies. In fact, The Verge is now reporting it couldn't find a single game maker that had been contacted. Still, the Entertainment Software Association, which represents game companies, issued a defense quoting, "The same video games played in the U.S. are played worldwide. However, the level of gun violence is exponentially higher in the U.S. than in other countries." In 2011, the Supreme Court rejected the claim that violent video games promote real-life violence. Shannon.
Trace, thank you very much. Time now, some real news, never fake. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee stepping down from the Country Music Association Board of Directors just one day after his appointment. Political backlash over his support for the National Rifle Association and traditional marriage, leading some country music board members to accuse the governor of sexism, bigotry, homophobia, and racism. Huckabee's response tonight to his ouster, quote, "Hate wins." Well, cops taking a Massachusetts man into custody for sending letters with white powder to 5 people, including one to Donald Trump Jr., that landed his wife Vanessa in the hospital. The New York Post reports his Facebook page is filled with political rants and a picture of him at the state Democratic National Convention in 2016. Well, a new study ranks California dead last of all states in quality of life. States were ranked on everything from education to opportunity and from infrastructure to crime. California scored low because of high housing costs and something called social engagement, basically a measure of how folks interact. Apparently, Californians don't really get along with their neighbors. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles Times has a long op-ed headlined with a startling question: how can a place with 58,000 homeless people continue to function? Well, German Chancellor Angela Merkel making a major concession by admitting to the existence of so-called no-go zones in Germany. In calling for zero tolerance for crime, Merkel specified she was talking about no-go zones often inhabited by Middle Eastern migrants. The comments reportedly left socialist German lawmakers, quote, speechless. Well, the Reverend Billy Graham was laid to rest in Charlotte, North Carolina today, and his funeral was really a celebration of his life and mission. His daughter Ruth talked about what a loving father he was, especially as she headed home to face him after her second devastating divorce.
Questions swirled in my mind. What was I going to say to Daddy? What was I going to say to Mother? What was I going to say to my children? I'd been such a failure. What were they going to say to me? We're tired of fooling with you. We told you not to do it. You've embarrassed us. And let me tell you, you women will understand you don't want to embarrass your father. You really don't want to embarrass Billy Graham. And many of you know that we live on the side of a mountain. And as I wound myself up the mountain, I rounded the last bend in my father's driveway, and my father was standing there waiting for me. As I got out of the car, he wrapped his arms around me and he said, "Welcome home." There was no shame, there was no blame, there was no condemnation, just unconditional love. And you know, my father was not God, but he showed me what God was like that day.
Ruth's brother, Franklin, echoed that. He said the Billy Graham that the world saw on television and saw in the big stadiums was the same Billy Graham that his family saw at home. Well, we hear all the time about so-called myths involving voter fraud, but a lawsuit against Pennsylvania is making some startling claims. So we dig in and examine the evidence next. Candace is not the only election issue sparking legal challenges in Pennsylvania. The Commonwealth now at the center of an explosive voting lawsuit with some stunning allegations. Former DOJ attorney J. Christian Adams says he has hundreds of pages of evidence to support his claim that non-citizens were allowed to register to vote in Pennsylvania. For example, in a letter from the Allegheny County Elections Division, a non-citizen is told his voting registration has been canceled because he's not a U.S. citizen. Another from Allegheny County allegedly voted twice in 2008 and once in 2012. Her registration was canceled in 2014, but possibly re-registered in 2015. And this non-citizen allegedly has an extensive voting history dating back to 2008, sports 3 different voter IDs, and is apparently still actively registered to vote. So joining me now in Washington is former attorney for the Department of Justice and president of the Public Interest Legal Foundation, J. Christian Adams. Welcome.
Hey, Shannon.
Okay, so this is really interesting. You say that based on publicly available information in Pennsylvania, there are 100,000 people who are not citizens who are registered to vote.
Look, there are non-citizens registered to vote. An election official in Philadelphia testified to the legislature there could be up to 100,000. We know it's happening. That's not a myth. That's reality. The question is, how bad is it? And the state of Pennsylvania is hiding the ball. We have asked them for records like the ones you've just shown from Pittsburgh. We've asked them for the data, and they're not letting us have it, so we have to take them to federal court.
Okay, so this is what the Pennsylvania Department of State, which I find interesting because they're a Commonwealth. I guess it wouldn't be the Department of Commonwealth. Anyway, right. They say this statement. The figure is not confirmed by any substantive analysis by the department. It's not a credible figure, and there is no reason to believe it's accurate.
Right, well, then the election official from Philadelphia who said it should retract. But here's the thing. If they say that, then they must know what the real answer is. So tell us. We've been asking them for months to let us see the data. We have a right under federal law, under motor voter, to go in and inspect these records. They've hired a third party to try to fix this mess. They're stonewalling legislators, chairmen of oversight committees. There's a problem in Pennsylvania with alien voting, and they're hiding the extent of it.
Okay, you have a right, as you said, by federal law to take a look. They're not cooperating on that. So I know that's going to be a bit of a process, and you've been doing this for months, trying to get this from them. I want to talk about what's also happening. This is in other states as well. But Maryland today, an interesting article talking about how they want to look at electronic probing. They want to make sure that Russia is not going to mess with their voting system, which nobody should want Russia to mess with any of our voting systems. But they also won't take voter IDs. They won't make that an issue. And I was reading that one of the counties that's here just outside of D.C., Montgomery County, there are more people registered to vote than there are people over 18 in that county.
Right. It's going on all over the country. I mean, we're litigating cases in Starr County, Texas, for example, Broward County, Florida, other places around the country. Over 150 counties have more people on the voter rolls than they have citizens even alive eligible to vote.
Wow.
So this is a nationwide problem.
Okay, so the Brennan Center for Justice says it's not. Here's what they say. Examination after examination of voter fraud claims reveal fraud is very rare. Voter impersonation is nearly non-existent. Most allegations of fraud turn out to be baseless. They say numerous studies have shown that.
Yeah, the Brennan Center for Justice is a George Soros-funded organization who's set up to deny voter fraud all over the country. They never come out and say it exists. Their job is to put up a smokescreen about the truth. The reality is that the voter fraud is real. I mean, you showed instances just now of people who were non-citizens voting in the 2008 presidential election, 2012, and then 3 days before President Trump is sworn in, they write a letter saying, please remove me from the rolls. They must have been afraid of what Trump was going to do. And so this is going on all over the country.
Why do you think that there's such a denial of it then? Because we've seen books and studies and all kinds of things written saying that these numbers just aren't true.
Well, look, the president had a particular number. We don't know what the truth is. That's the problem, and Pennsylvania is hiding it. And so why is this happening? Why does this matter? The real foreign influence in our elections are aliens voting in our elections. Maryland, they're trying to fix machines. The real problem is they've allowed people on the rolls who are not legal.
And we know that there are states. I mean, I've talked to Governor Abbott in Texas, who, when he was the Attorney General, said that they had cases, you know, on a more frequent basis than people would think, that he had prosecuted people. People have gone to jail over this.
In Starr County, Texas, there's a human trafficking scheme. This is a county along the Rio Grande, where phony people are giving voter registrations. And what does that do? It gives them a pass with Border Patrol. It's as good as a passport because it means you're a citizen. Those registrations are still on the rolls. This is not an isolated problem to Pennsylvania or Texas. It's going on in Virginia, it's going on in New Jersey. And sometimes, Shannon, the immigrants are the victims, right? They're going through the motor voter process. They don't want to register to vote, but it's getting pushed on them, and then it messes up their immigration status.
What do you make of this situation in Illinois, in Chicago, where they're giving out city key cards, which allow them, because they say, listen, we do have people here illegally, but we want to be able to, you know who they are, have them some kind of ID so that they can take part in municipal and community things. Yep. Now that, as I understand it, that card, and they've said, is acceptable to use as voter ID or an ID to get you into voting. So how in the world did they police that to say, we are going to give this to people who are here illegally? But basically the comment I heard from them was, they said, well, it's against the law to vote illegally, so we expect them not to use it for that.
Yeah, the honor system is failing. You could see it in the documents you showed. The honor system is failing. To get registered to vote in America, you just check a box. There's no backup. Folks think that there's some system that they're checking. There's no system they're checking. That's why so many aliens are getting on the rolls, either because they're not telling the truth. We have cases where they say, I'm not a citizen, and they're still getting registered to vote. We have the documents.
Well, it makes me think of the Arizona case that ended up at the Supreme Court a couple of years ago about these documents. And, you know, basically many states were told, this is not your job, it's the federal government's, and so you stay out of it. So we'll see. Keep us up to date on the Pennsylvania lawsuit. We'd love to know more. And as you get information, if they turn it over.
Right. Thank you, Shannon.
All right, Jay Christian Adams, great to have you. All right, Google accused again of racial discrimination. You might not find all the details in a Google search, but you will find them right here on Night Court. That's next.
Coaching means making tough choices.
All right, welcome back to Fox News at Night from Washington. A Chicago area sheriff and other officials being sued by 17 laid-off county jail bosses. They say they lost their jobs because they wanted to unionize, and say the county kept on political appointees who supervised acupuncture treatment, cable television, and talent for inmates while eliminating public safety roles. A county board rep denies the positions even exist, saying, quote, we're not crazy. They say recent budget cuts are behind the layoffs. Earlier this week, a huge brawl broke out at that very jail. 2 people were hospitalized. Time now for Night Court. Google again under fire for alleged race discrimination and retaliation. Arden Wilberg claims that he was fired from his job as a recruiter for YouTube after he complained about the company's hiring practices. He says he felt they unfairly discriminated against white and Asian men. He claims the tech giant set quotas for hiring underrepresented minorities and deleted emails and other records of the so-called diversity requirements. Let's bring in our legal eagles, Emily Campagno, a former federal attorney, and Kent Zimmerman, contributor for the National Law Journal. Great to see both of you tonight.
Hey, good to see you.
Thank you. All right, I'll read a little bit of the complaint. He says for the past several years, Google has had and implemented clear and irrefutable policies memorialized in writing and consistently implemented in practice of systemically discriminating in favor of job applicants who are Hispanic, African American, or female, and against Caucasian and Asian men. He went on to say the policy, the purpose was to achieve diversity in the workforce and to manage the public relations problems they were having about underrepresentation of women and minority in the workforce. So with that in mind, Kent, how do you defend Google?
Listen, you know, Google is going to make the following case in all likelihood. They're going to say, we only hire qualified candidates, and within the pool of qualified candidates, we prefer to have a workforce that looks like the population, which is diverse. Now, there's nothing illegal about doing that as long as they're not discriminating in a way that's against the law. We've seen the plaintiff's side of the case, and they make, you know, good arguments in their complaint, but we haven't seen Google's side of the case yet, and so the facts are going to matter. And the only other thing I'd say, Shannon, you mentioned quotas. It's not clear if it was goals they had or quotas they had. Goals, if they're flexible, that can be legal.
Yeah, the plaintiff says that there were all kinds of instructions, like you can only hire minorities for this next round, you can only hire women for this next round, things like that. He's attached some exhibits to the complaint that he says show that, but he also says that they were told routinely to purge any communications that refer to these things as if they were trying to hide the trail. Now, Google says this: we have a clear policy to hire candidates based on their merit, not their identity. At the same time, we unapologetically try to find a diverse pool of qualified candidates for open roles, as this helps us hire the best people, improve our culture, and build better products. Emily?
Right. Kent's absolutely right here that it depends on whether the facts are true. And what's notable here is that in that almost 30-page complaint, there is an incredible volume of specificity and citation to actual documentation. So the complaint cites emails, meeting notes, direct messages with bosses, and cites actual policy, meaning that this is all provable. So unlike a complaint we saw earlier this year alleging discrimination against white males, that was really an overbroad, nebulous complaint. Here, it's not just allegations. There are actual specific details that plaintiff cites here that are provable. Now, as you said, you know, Google came out today and said, no, we hire on the merits and we unapologetically are committed to a diverse hiring, but the question is just whether they go too far. And if they indeed are purging non-diverse applicants from the hiring pool that this plaintiff has alleged, that's squarely against California law. And I think that overcorrection is something we're seeing throughout the country, right? We saw it with Harvard. Asian American applicants there alleged Harvard was unfairly discriminating against federal law by not accepting them admission. That led to a DOJ investigation. So this tech case could actually be quite seminal.
Yeah, and Kent, he also says that he alleges in the complaint, there are many different people he tried to report this to say, listen, this is not a good policy. You're giving us quotas. You're not accepting resumes from white men and from Asian men because you only want us to hire certain kinds of people. He says everywhere he went that he was blown off, essentially, and that it ended up with him being fired because he wouldn't stop complaining. So now is Google facing a retaliation claim that sounds like it has some merit?
They may be facing a retaliation claim that has merit. You know, certainly if you look at the plaintiff's side of the case, there's allegations in there that would be damning if the facts bear them out. So I think that's an issue potentially for Google. But I also think, you know, it has been said in court, and Emily mentioned what happens in college admissions. The courts have said you can legally consider race to try to promote diversity in college admissions. And similarly here, Google, if they're going to have a diverse workforce, that means by definition, they're going to hire some qualified applicants who are white, others who are Asian, and others who are other races and come from other places. There's nothing illegal on its face about doing that. And I also, the last thing I would say there is that Google is facing claims from men alleging discrimination, from women alleging discrimination, from white people alleging discrimination, from minorities alleging. And so it can't all be true is basically where I would come out on that.
And Emily, the courts have said you cannot have a quota system when it comes to education. You can consider race holistically with other factors. Could that help Google here in their arguments?
It might be. Now, remember, this is in California law, but that actually, what's interesting here, and especially what Kent was speaking about, is that Google's workforce has hovered around 91% white and Asian male for the last 3+ years. So regardless of that policy, it hasn't actually changed who they've hired. So that doesn't necessarily bode well in the plaintiff's favor. But again, if they have this written policy, that's against the law. Right. So we will see this. Note too, he received a right to sue. It will not go to arbitration. This is headed for trial.
All right, we will see. Folks at home, tell us what you think. Who wins the argument here? How would you rule? They're the jury now. Emily and Kent, thank you very much.
You bet, Shannon.
Thank you.
All right, more news right after this break.